there, I'm Wendy and welcome to my channel where I share knitting and crochet tutorial videos for my projects and techniques. And in today's knitting video, I'm going to show you how I deal with the little holes that can appear at the underarm points when you're knitting a top-down jumper. So if this is something that's happened to you, don't worry at all. It is just something that naturally occurs when you're making an armhole and you've got two sets of stitches pulling in opposite directions. Now, I've tried lots of different ways of getting around this, and I found this method is the best way that works for me. So I'm going to show you in this video. So just before we start, if you're new to my channel, then don't forget to subscribe and you'll get to hear when my latest videos and updates go live. And if you enjoy the video, it would be lovely if you gave me a thumbs up as well. But for now, let's take a little overview of what I'm actually going to be doing. Now, my jumper is being made using a UK weight double knitting yarn, so I'm using a 4mm size circular needle. And I've also got to hand another needle to help pick up the threads to create the new stitches, but I'm using a smaller size needle for this, and I'm using a 3.25, but it really doesn't matter what weight yarn you are using, but I would suggest that you use a smaller size needle for picking up your stitches. I've also got 3 ring style stitch markers to hand, and for the video I'm using 2 the same and 1 that's different, and that's because I want that just to show you where the side seam is on the main body. Looking at the jumper here that I'm working on, I had 60 stitches that were on hold and they were on waste yarn, and I've popped those back onto the 4mm circular needle, so they're ready to knit. And then in my underarm section, I've got 12 stitches all together going across from one side of the armhole to the other. So my pattern is telling me that I will need to pick up 12 stitches along that underarm point. But if I go to do that straight away, if I just hold this, you can see it, if I try and connect the stitch from the upper arm to the lower arm, you can automatically see that a hole is going to appear, and that's where the stitches have been stretched. So what I'm aiming to do in this video is to tighten up the threads at the top of the armhole, between the armhole and the main body, and again at the base of the armhole, between the armhole and the main body. And by tightening that up, that will reduce the size of any hole. And then afterwards, if there's any tiny little gaps showing, I'm going to just use a needle and thread and cover those over, which I'll show you as soon as I've done this. So what I'm going to do now is join in my new yarn, and I'm going to knit across all the stitches on the upper arm section, and I'll meet you back here when I get to this underarm corner point, and we can look at tightening up the stitches to help prevent any holes from happening. So I've now knitted all the stitches that were on the upper sleeve, and I'm now ready to start picking up the stitches along the underarm point. Now, on my pattern, I said I had 12 stitches to pick up in total, with 6 stitches leading me to the side seam point on the main body. So it's quite easy for me because I've actually got 6 stitches here, so that's fine, but I need to do something to prevent a hole from happening. So I'm going to create the extra 2 stitches by making 1 stitch between the main body and the upper sleeve, and then another stitch between the main body and the underarm section. And by using up some of that slack, I'm hoping to reduce the size of any hole. Then when I work the following round, I can make a couple of decreases at the underarm point, and that will reduce my stitch count back to the right number for me to continue working my sleeve. So I've just got my hand underneath these stitches, and you can see this is the first line of stitches in the main body of the sweater, and this is the first line of stitches in the upper sleeve, and I've got these horizontal threads here going across. Now I'm going to have the tip of my needle pointing towards me, and I'm going to miss that first thread, and I'm going to go underneath and back up under the second thread. Then I'm going to twist that needle right the way around so it's pointing away from me, and just give it a little tug just so that I can tighten up the thread a little bit and loosen the stitch that's on the needle. Then I'm going to draw it back, and I'm going to pop the needle underneath that top horizontal thread. And then this is probably the trickiest part of it all. I'm then just going to pick up that stitch that was on the needle, that second one from the tip, and I'm just going to piggyback it over the top of the needle, and I've created an extra stitch. Now I'm going to knit that stitch across now onto my right hand needle, and that's one stitch made in the armhole. So now I'm going to turn my work around so that I'm looking at the underarm section, which is here. So we can see this here. I'll turn it right the way around. So now taking a look at it, I can see that I've got the line of stitches from my main body, and I've got the line of stitches that are in the underarm section. And so I've got these slack stitches here. So I'm going to miss the top thread here, and I'm just going to put my hand underneath so you can see it. And I'm going to go underneath the second thread down, and I've got that needle pointing towards me again, and then like before I'm going to twist it around so it's pointing away, give it a little tug just to tighten up the threads and also to loosen the stitch that's on the needle, draw the needle back, and then I'm just going to go underneath that top horizontal thread that was there. And then again, this is the trickiest part of it all, which is just to pick up that stitch and draw it over the thread and create a stitch. Now, before I knit that stitch onto my right hand needle, I'm going to put a ring stitch marker so that when I knit my next round, I know that this is the point where I want to make the decreases. So now I'm going to knit that onto my right hand needle. So hopefully that's one corner of my underarm all sorted. So now I want to pick up 6 stitches going along to the underarm point on my main body. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now I'm at the side seam point on my main body and I'm halfway across. I'm going to put in the other stitch marker, the one that was a little bit different, and that's going to be my new beginning of round marker. So that's where I know where the underarm point and sleeve seam will be when I'm knitting the rest of my sleeve. Now I can pick up 6 stitches that will take me back to the corner underarm point on the other side of my sleeve. So now if we take a look at it, we've got the stretched stitches which are in that corner point of the other underarm. And again, if I bring my cable across, you can see if I try to knit that, I've got a hole ready to appear. So again, we're going to repeat the same thing, and we're going to be picking up 1 stitch here and 1 stitch between the body and the upper arm. So with my spare needle, I've got the point facing towards me again, and I'm going to miss that top horizontal thread between the 2 stitches, and I'm going to go underneath the second thread down, and then I'm going to turn that needle away from me and give it a little tug, and then I'm going to draw the needle back and take it underneath that top horizontal thread. And then again, I'm just going to pick that stitch over the tip of my needle, and I've created an extra stitch and used up some of the slack. So now I'm going to knit that onto my right hand needle, and I'm ready to work the last stitch here, and that's the stitch between the main body and the upper sleeve. So if you're using magic loop, you will want to readjust your cable needle now so that you've got a loop coming out here at the underarm point on your main body, which is what I'm going to do now. So now we have our final little section to deal with, and as I said before, we've got our upper sleeve stitches here and the main body of our garment here, and again I can see these stretched horizontal threads. So one more time with my needle, I'm going to miss that first horizontal thread. I'm going to point the needle towards me and pick up that second horizontal thread down, twist my needle around, give it a little tug and tighten up the stitches and loosen the stitch that's on this needle, and then I'm going to draw it back and take it underneath that top horizontal thread, and then I'm just going to pick that second stitch away from the needle over the tip of my needle, and I've made the extra stitch. So now I'm going to put the other ring marker between these two stitches I've created, so that on that next round I know this is the point where I want to decrease my stitches back. So now when I take a look at it, I can see I've got all the sleeve stitches on my cable needle, and I've got the two ring markers here. And the ring markers are indicating where I made 2 extra stitches on each side of my armhole. So I'm going to knit all the way around till I get to 2 stitches before the ring marker, and I'll show you how I'm going to decrease to bring my stitch count back down to the right number. So I'm back now to 2 stitches before the stitch marker in the underarm corner point, and I'm going to work a decrease called a slip slip knit to reduce these 2 stitches back down to 1. So I'm going to pop my needle in as if I'm going to knit, so it's going in from left to right, but I'm just slipping the stitch across from the left hand needle to the right hand needle. And then I'm going to do that again with the second stitch. I'm going to pop the needle in from left to right as if I'm going to knit it, but I'm just going to slide it across to the right hand needle. Then I can put both stitches back onto the left hand needle, and basically I've changed the position of the stitch on the needle. The left side of the stitch is now on the front of the needle. Now I can just knit into the back of those stitches. So I've popped my right hand needle into the back and formed a cross, and I'm just going to knit as normal, and I've reduced my 2 stitches down to 1. So now I can remove my stitch marker, and on the other side of the stitch marker I'm just going to do a knit 2 together. So now my stitch count on this side of my underarm is correct. So I'm now just going to knit across till I get to the other stitch marker, and I'll do the same thing again. So I'm now back to 2 stitches before the ring marker on the other side of my underarm corner point. So again I'm going to do a slip slip knit with these 2 stitches. So I'm popping my needle in the stitch knitwise and sliding it across, and into the second stitch the same way, sliding it across. Then I can just slip those stitches back straight onto the left hand needle, and I've just changed the positioning of those stitches on the needle. The left side of the stitches is now sitting on the front of my needle, and then I can point my right hand needle in and take it through the back of the stitches and knit them both off. And there I've reduced 2 stitches to 1. So again I can take my stitch marker out, and I'm going to knit 2 together just to reduce the 2 stitches down to 1 on the other side of the stitch marker. So now my stitch count is correct, and I should have potentially reduced the size of any underarm point holes. So I'm going to knit another round now so that we can take a quick look at it, and if there is still any small hole I'll show you how you can fill that in with a needle and thread. So I'm back from knitting a couple of rounds, and as you can see I'm basically hole free in that area. However, there are a couple of tiny gaps I wouldn't mind tightening up. So I'm going to do this firstly on the side where I joined in my new yarn, and I'm going to use that to bring through to the right side at the base of one of those tiny little holes. So I'm just going to bring that through to the front, and I'm almost going to do a triangular stitch. I've come out here at the bottom. I'm going to go either side of that gap horizontally and come across, and then I'm going to go back into exactly the same point I came out of, and it's just the same as making a duplicate stitch if you've ever done that. And then I can just tighten it up, and that just reduces my gap, and I wouldn't mind doing that one as well. So I'm just going to take my yarn out at the base of that little hole, and then I'm going to copy the stitch actually above. I'm going to go in exactly behind there horizontally, and then like an upside down triangle I'm going to come back down through where I went in and tighten it up, and that's my holes completely disappeared. So that's it. That's the method that I use when I'm picking up the underarm sleeves and working those corner points on a top-down jumper. So I hope it's been useful and helpful to you, and I hope you enjoy making your top-down jumpers as much as I do. So for now, I'll just say happy knitting, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye!